one of the main purposes of IFS is to really start to work with the parts of ourselves to start to naturally clear a path for that self to start to lead, and kind of switching that power dynamic. When we start to lead more from self, understandably, it creates so much relief, peace and ease, natural grounding, natural confidence, natural clarity, compassion, accessibility, spaciousness, all these qualities that we feel throughout our day, maybe in certain moments or certain activities, etc. But we don't always have like more consistent access. And so, yeah, one of my favorite parts about IFS is that's its premise is to create more self access, or what's otherwise known as self leadership, or more self energy in the world.
Hi, everyone. It is the Ego Project, and I am Lisa Heidel, and I'm typically here with my co-host, Christine Seidel, but she is traveling and unable to join us today. So I am moving forward with our very special guest, Ryen Blaschke. I said that correct, Ryen? Okay.
Yeah, you nailed it.
Welcome, Ryen. So happy to have you here with us. And we are going to be talking about internal family systems today. Ryen, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you because, as I told you earlier, every time I try to explain it to someone, they look at me like I've lost my mind. Okay. So I think you're going to clear this all up, and I can just give them the direction to this video and say, go listen to this. Okay. So once again, it's about internal family systems, and Ryen Blaschke is going to be joining us. I'm going to read your bio, Ryen, and then we're going to jump into the questions. Okay.
Yeah. Awesome.
Ryen Blaschke is a holistic therapeutic coach based in Boulder, Colorado. Ryen has been providing holistic therapeutic coaching since 2019. She holds a master's degree in consciousness studies and transpersonal psychology, as well as a life coach certification based in the internal family systems model of psychotherapy. And it's a great bio. It's so great. And you're coming to us from Boulder. How is the weather in Boulder?
Actually, today's a snow day, which is kind of exciting. It's always sweet when that happens.
It's a good day to do a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to your bio there, Ryen?
Not at this time. Yeah, if anything else comes up, I'm sure I can sneak it in. But yeah, I appreciate that. That's a good summary. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's get started. Okay, so can you give us a definition of what internal family systems is?
Absolutely. So internal family systems, model psychotherapy, otherwise known as IFS, it was developed by Richard Schwartz. Sometimes he describes it as a model that he channeled. He doesn't like to describe that he built it from scratch, that it was very much something that came about and he brought it into the world. And the basic premise works with the fact that we have multiplicity, meaning that we have many different parts of us. And at the center is this core self, or true self, or mindful self, bigger self with capital S. And that's really what's meant to kind of lead us. But then also we collaborate and work with many different sub-personalities and different parts of us that have specialties and specific points of view and gifts, as well as ways that they navigate the world, interact with the world and others, patterning, etc. And so IFS, the basic premise is that we're not just one personality or one self, but we have a main essence, and then we also have many different aspects to us as well. So very beautiful way of honoring our complexity as humans.
I love that. And if I understand correctly, we're all born with this. It's how we come
Yeah.
into the world.
Absolutely, especially the notion of having a core self. And I can talk more about that, but absolutely, we're born with this core essence, and there's certain attributes to that and certain energies and traits to that energy and what it means. And that self is unbreakable, it's innate, it's absolutely what we're born with. No matter of trauma can take that away, etc.
Oh, that's good. And we want to make sure that our listeners understand that this is not dissociative personality disorder or
Absolutely.
multiple personality disorder. People who have experienced severe trauma maybe will have dissociative personality, but that's not what we're having a discussion about today, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. And Richard Schwartz, he came about this, idea basically as it was naturally coming about within his clients, as people were talking about, well, one part of me is saying this, or I'm hearing one voice or perspective and another saying this. And so naturally, I'm sure everyone can kind of think of times when they can notice different perspectives and sides within themselves, and then, the relationship between those things. So yeah, he found that, and I found this to be true. I'm sure we can all relate to this, that there's this natural reality of our multiplicity that we notice already.
Mhm. I love
Yeah.
that because it's so true, right? Like we're like, well, one part of me wants to do this and another part wants to do this, or I feel conflicted, or
Yes.
I don't something my one of my favorite little mantra, resistance has meaning, right?
Mm,
Well, what is that resistance in me and what does it mean? I can go into these parts, which we're going to talk about, and
yeah.
figure all of that out.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, that's so good. Okay, so can you touched upon the essence of self, and it's a
Yeah.
big S self, right? And
Hmm.
that's who we are at our core. Does that change over time?
No, I think I love that question. It it has essential qualities that pretty much are always there, and certainly the parts of us change over time. And we're always a blend of a bunch of things. But there are some core elements to the self that are unbreakable, innate, always within us. And, I think there is sometimes a reference to those qualities also being um, beyond this lifetime, or, there could be spiritual perspectives on that, just this essence that no matter what is always there. And some folks can contribute that to maybe your energy is moving throughout many lifetimes, or it's unbreakable essence to who we are. So there's, according to people's frameworks and beliefs and whatnot, you can look at it from a variety of ways. But
Hmm. Oh, that's a
so,
great way to describe that because we all feel that, right? We meet someone, we're like, I don't know, I just feel like I like them. Like, I don't know what I like their energy, or, I like their higher self, or whatever you wanted to call it. And what we're picking up on is their innate essence. And
mhm.
then what happens through life, as none of us get out without scars or injury in some manner, right? And then these parts start to come into being inside of us.
Yeah.
Accurate. So, can you talk a little bit about the parts, what they
Yeah.
are, and then how we use them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also want to note that kind of what you describe is this attraction or magnetism is, I'm a believer that of course we have our own frequency, but then also there is this energy of self energy that we're also naturally drawn to. And there are some qualities to that um, Richard Schwartz also kind of outlines in the eight C's, and the 5 Ps, I believe. And it's qualities like compassion, clarity, calm, courage, qualities such as this. And some of the P's are patience, persistence, presence. So just these qualities that really speak to the essence of the self. It's one of the trickiest things to describe, but I always describe it as something that we already know, that moments of feeling that, and that depending on our system, like you said, the scars we've endured, or the hurts and whatnot, that depending on that, we may or may not have kind of a certain level of access to the natural qualities of the self, or the parts will start to run the show or drive the bus rather than the self driving the bus. And so one of the main purposes of IFS is to really start to work with the parts of ourselves to start to naturally clear a path for that self to start to lead, and kind of switching that power dynamic. And when we start to lead more from self, understandably, it creates so much relief, peace and ease, natural grounding, natural confidence, natural clarity, compassion, accessibility, spaciousness, all these qualities that we feel throughout our day, maybe in certain moments or certain activities, etc. But we don't always have like more consistent access. And so, yeah, one of my favorite parts about IFS is that's its premise is to create more self access, or what's otherwise known as self leadership, or more self energy in the world. And that's really the mission of IFS Institute, and also my personal mission as a practitioner is to bring more about that in the world.
That's so good. And isn't that what we're all seeking?
Yeah.
We all, right? We all want to feel like, we're living these fulfilled lives that we're in charge of. We get to
Yeah.
make the decisions that just light us up. And we should all be able to live that life, right? And we
Yeah.
can if we do the work. And so I so love this. Yeah. That was beautifully put, Ryan. Beautiful.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead now. If I understand correctly, so we have three main parts, which are the managers, firefighters, and exiles.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you each one separately for listeners who maybe aren't familiar with IFS. And we'll go ahead and should we start with exiles?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, let's start with exiles. Can you explain what exiles are?
Yeah. So exiles are aspects of us or parts of us that are encompassing a range of hurts or wounds or traumas that happened at a specific moment of time. A moment of time where we weren't able to get the support we needed. We weren't able to process something. So a hurt happens, and then because of the lack of support for whatever reason, whether it's because we're young and we can't fully process it or understand it, or we don't have the support we need in the moment of time, maybe certain cultural situations don't allow for us to fully process it or even recognize it, etc. And so what happens is there's this unprocessed hurt that our system recognizes that it exists, and understandably views it as a threat to our system. That this isn't a fun thing to have or feel or be connected to. So our system, being so intelligent, a part comes online to then protect us from feeling that hurt. And so in response, this hurt gets exiled in our system. It gets hidden away, tucked away. And then also this protective part comes online, and its whole purpose is to do whatever it can to keep us from feeling that hurt, from that hurt being triggered, for the possibility of it to be further hurt, etc., really connected to in any way. And so then we move on to the manager, which is the first line of defense. So we have two kinds of protective mechanisms or protective parts. And so the manager is that first one. And I think one of the most helpful ways of looking at the difference between the two lines of defense or protective parts is one is proactive and one is reactive. And so that first line of defense is proactive. This part will do, whatever it can to keep us, again, from even getting close to feeling that, for hopefully to not have to face that hurt again. Maybe it was a moment of perceived failure or a mistake or something like that, that was very high stakes. There was a lot of beliefs that were absorbed at that time about oneself. And oftentimes these exiles or these hurts are come about in a time when we're not fully developed yet. And we can get exiles as adults, definitely, but most of them are developed at a time when we're not fully mature and developed. And so understandably, as we have a sense of self or psychological development at a certain level, we make sense as best we can at that time about what just happened or what. And so, as we know, for example, children, the go-to is to personalize, to take that on because of their orientation is very based in the self orienting to the world. There's not as much of a multi-perspectival orientation to the world yet. And so, for example, a hurt will happen. It's like my only way to make sense of it is to personalize it. And then also, I might have received messages from a teacher or a parent or a friend or something like that, that, I'm not good enough, or I did something really wrong, or I'm a failure. And so instead of I did this thing, or instead of my behavior was incorrect, it becomes about me, right? And so oftentimes exiles will just, take on false beliefs, view ways of looking at the world that aren't 100% based in reality, that are limited, and just carry a lot of pain, and so that comes about, and again, just gets tucked away and also frozen in time. Yeah.
So your goal with IFS is to heal that exile, to be able to connect with that exile, and we'll call it an inner child, if you will.
Yeah.
Right? For listeners who aren't familiar with the languaging of exile. And it could be inner child at different ages, right? It could be at 5 years old, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, as an example. And let's say if you're 10 years old and you get bullied, as an example, at school, and you don't have anywhere safe at home to talk about it, no one at school protects you, and you aren't able to process through to understand that it wasn't about you, the other person had the issue, that type of thing. So you kind of lock it away. Your little 10-year-old is inside and is bullied and hurt and harmed by that.
Yeah.
And so it's stuck inside of you as a 10-year-old. So then these protective parts kind of start to guard it, if you will. Yeah, they become like sentries, right? They're not going to let anything hurt that 10-year-old again. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
And so what are the managers and the firefighters right,
Mhm.
are the protectors. Can you tell us a little bit about managers? Because that's the first line of defense, right?
Yeah.
Okay, can we talk about the managers and then we'll discuss the firefighters?
Yeah. And thanks for giving like an example to work with, because I also think that's helpful too, as we're starting to learn about what these parts even mean, is to have a good example. So yeah, using this bullying example, we can imagine the protective parts that might come about to protect that bullied wound or part of us that was bullied. It could be a part that wants to get ahead of things and is maybe critical towards others, or keeps us from displaying any amount of vulnerability or maybe authenticity. And understandably, these protective mechanisms are going to be so individual and personalized to each person and their history, etc. But let's imagine that maybe there's this protective mechanism of, um, being critical. And the irony is that oftentimes those protective mechanisms will start to repeat some of those same criticisms that the exile was wounded with, in order to motivate us, the bigger us, to not let that happen. So for example, it might bring motivations of, make sure you don't display this, or don't be too nice, or don't let them in, because, and then it could go even further into, they might judge you, or it's not safe. And so kind of bringing in certain beliefs about whether or not we're safe or not. And so our protective mechanisms will use motivations uh, that can then, depending on degree of how alive they are in our system or how activated they are, um, they they will become more pronounced or more extreme. So protective parts managers, they come about in our system again in a time of extreme need. They are forced into their roles. Oftentimes those protective parts are perceived as parts that enjoy doing it, are there just to torture us or torture others, and they really are not. That the most beautiful part of IFS is to really bring credit where it's due, is to bring it to all parts of us, especially our protective parts, and recognizing that, again, depending on what's going on and how much activation it is, a protective part, I like to describe it, has a spectrum of helpfulness, that at its core need is, uh, yeah, let's make sure the other person is somewhat safe, or the environment is somewhat safe, before we, put our eggs in that basket. Great. That keeps us alive and surviving, and very necessary. Probably has kept us out of harm's way a lot of times. Has probably, yeah, helped us. It literally helped us survive when we were younger. But if that part goes a little too far, it could bring more extreme mechanisms, like causing harm towards others, or really having a lot of inner criticism, bullying us, etc. So if that makes any sense, that the same
Yeah.
part at its essence is so incredibly helpful, well-intentioned, well-meaning, but for whatever reason, it will go to extreme cases if it feels it needs to. Yeah.
Taking that example of bullying, like a
Yeah.
10-year-old that was bullied, and let's say that they were creative, they were drawing a picture,
Yeah.
and a teacher criticized it,
Yeah.
in a way that was very hurtful, shamed them in front of the classroom,
Yeah.
maybe even tore it up, as an example. So,
Right.
and then they weren't able to process through that. They didn't have a safe adult they could talk to, or maybe they just didn't mention it out of shame and embarrassment.
Yeah.
It gets kind of, the exile gets locked in there. And then the manager might say, well, we're never drawing again.
Right.
We're done with creativity. That's
Yeah.
for people who are naturally talented, or for maybe it's frivolous and not
Mm.
something to be taken seriously. And so, and that's a little extreme, but I've known people who are like, they have memories around creative wounding, and
Yeah.
they completely stop doing it. And that, would that be the manager inside of them telling them, only way to keep you safe and not shamed is
Yeah.
by no longer being creative?
Yeah. That would be a great example of it going a little too far, where it keeps us from also accessing the gifts of that wound. Also, I think for me, one of the most heartbreaking and also beautiful things of when we get to the healing process of healing that exile, or unburdening that exile, is not only do we release the hurts and the wounds and the false beliefs, et cetera, but we also release the gifts that have also been tucked away that we miss. We feel that lacking and that disconnect, to what you're saying, of this natural part of us. And so certainly qualities, a lot of our positive qualities also get hidden away in the process.
That's so beautiful when you say it like that, because our little, creative 10-year-old, who knows what that could have grown into,
Absolutely.
right? And so by releasing it, it opens up a whole, new doorway of experiences and opportunities that we didn't even know existed. Yeah. Mm,
Absolutely.
that's beautiful. So then that's the manager. So the manager tends to be a little more structured, a little more dictatorial, maybe, type A, if you will.
Um, I don't know if I would have to think about that description a little bit more. Um, it's mostly proactive. So again, it does have a bit of a plan or a patterning to it. Um, and it'll try different ways to kind of be proactive and protective. So it could be delivering messages of creativity is frivolous or not important, etc. Um, but then, as life happens, of course, uh, those managers can only protect us so far. New triggers and experiences will come in, and that exile will start to kind of make its feelings known. And so that's when then the second line of defense, the firefighters, comes in, and those are the reactive parts that come in and really put out the fire. Um, and so that's if that's helpful at all.
It does. So would the firefighter, would you kind of say that's when people are like, oh, that triggered me? Because, right, when you react strongly to something, and then later you're like, I have no idea what that was, right? Like, I don't know why someone, saying that about, my job triggered me so strongly. And I
Yeah.
reacted with anger. I don't know why. Is that kind of
Yeah.
what you see with the firefighters?
The reactive part of it is the firefighter. Yeah, the triggers could happen at any time, as we
Yeah.
all know, right?
Uh-huh.
And so, but yeah, certainly if we then respond with a strong reactionary mechanism or reaction, then typically that is a firefighter. And so examples of that would be, it could be like a type of backlash or anger or rage or something like that, just to put out the conflict, to, really win or conquer something and just make it end. Um, it could also be something to soothe and numb the pain as soon as possible. So that could be any kind of distraction or coping mechanism, drugs, alcohol, TV, etc. It could also be forms of distraction, disassociation, fatigue, and also chronic illness, things that really just kind of take us away in very powerful ways from those pains. If we're not able to, if we're in a scenario or situation that we continue to be triggered, there can be more of these longer term firefighter type parts that really do obviously an excellent job of keeping us from accessing or feeling that wound.
I think the human mind is incredible. It
Yeah.
truly is, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, because the job of it's a processing center, right? That's where we process. But we know that we have to keep our vessel, our person safe. That's first and foremost what we need to do. And there's times, when we're children, we rely on others to do that. That's what they're there for, right?
Yeah.
Caregivers, parents. And then, but sometimes they can't, and they can't be with us 24/7. And we're going to butt up against the world, and we're going to butt up against others, and wounding is going to occur. And we want to make sure that listeners understand that everything that hurt us does not cause a part or an exile. It doesn't. If we process through it, if we're able to process through this situation, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, as an example, if, you're 12 years old and your, best friend calls you a name, that's probably not going to cause, an exile unless they call you a name and then get an entire group of people to gang up against you and ostracize you.
It could, yeah, or it could just be the one voice and it's really meaningful. It's a very important connection to you. So it could be the one voice, and you just aren't able to have that contradicted in a positive way or resolved with the person, or maybe supported by your parents or etc. Yeah. So for whatever reason, it remains alive to whatever degree. And also, yeah, I think kind of what you're speaking to is that our parts, have different volumes, I would say. So some, in my personal experience, accessing exiles in myself, some feel, in quotes, bigger than others. Some I and some also have kind of directed my life more than others. Um, so yeah, they can really have a range too.
Thank you for clarifying that, because there was a little bit from my perspective, like, well, that shouldn't bother you. Of course, if it bothers you, if it created an exile, it created it. It's not up for me to decide if
Right.
that's irrelevant. And no one should be able to tell you whether something that happened to you
Yeah,
was worthy of attention. That's not up to
absolutely.
someone else to make that decision. So thank you for
It's
clarifying that.
yeah, kind of like little T trauma versus big T trauma. That's
Yeah.
another way of looking at it.
Yeah. And those hurts, they do hurt. If someone tells me I hurt them, I don't get to tell them I
Yeah.
just because I didn't mean to doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Of
Mm,
course, you feel what you have to feel. And, that's up to you to process through that.
yeah.
So if we find we're in a situation and we have a strong reaction to something that we perceive as a slight, and we have a bigger than life almost reaction to it,
Mm,
like it doesn't quite warrant, like you're like, oh, even later you're like, I'm not sure why I reacted that way.
mm,
Is that usually your tell that there's a deeper healing that we need to go internal and work with some parts there. Is that usually the tell?
Yeah, absolutely. And IFS also utilizes a term called trailheads, which is a term of, oh, there's a certain trigger or activation in our system that, yeah, perhaps isn't super obvious as to why, or there isn't like a clear pathway or evidence to what it is. There's a bit of mystery, or maybe there's a bit of subconscious activation going on there. That certainly that's an invitation to go further. And it also, I really love that term because um, it does bring a lot of hope into the concept of being triggered or activated, and that it doesn't have to be something that we need to fear or avoid. Certainly, we have parts of us that are in our system that do typically fear when we're triggered, and that's their whole job. But eventually, we can start to bring the perspective in that, oh, these are trailheads and something I can get curious about, within myself or with a practitioner and dive deeper on them. Yeah.
I like that too, because once again, we have so many options for support in the world. And if we're open to healing, then we can seek those things out and find them. And we don't need to be afraid, right? We are like, okay, it feels like if I explore this, if I go deeper, I may never come out of this. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that's our managers and firefighters, is that
Yeah,
they're
absolutely.
telling us, oh, we can't go there.
Yeah.
There's something scary in there, right?
Yeah. Which I find so helpful because we can start to identify with those resistances, those avoidance mechanisms like, ooh, that's just my belief or my framework and we start to label certain feelings or parts of ourselves as either good or bad. And of course, IFS's main premise is that there are no bad parts and that they all serve a purpose and they're all very much there for a reason and are well-intentioned, etc. Yeah.
When you are working with clients with using IFS and they meet a part, maybe they meet a manager, would a manager be more probably one of the first ones they're going to meet? Yeah,
Absolutely.
yes, because they're
Yeah.
kind of at the forefront guarding, right? Keeping everything
Hmm.
running. Um, how would you get to know them? Like, what kind of questions would you ask them?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite parts of the process of IFS is that we get to really be curious and to follow the lead of the client's system. And so as, IFS practitioners, we're not coming in with an agenda. We're not there to lead the direction in any way, and that we really are honoring their system and following the lead of their parts. And so certainly most of the time we are starting with a protective part of some kind, whether it's a firefighter or a manager, because like you said, they are at the forefront. But also oftentimes there is self energy that's naturally present. Usually it's the self that brings them to session. It brings them to healing work. And so we get to speak to that aspect of them as well. And so, but as we start to recognize, we start to detect certain protective parts in the system as we're getting to know them, they're describing, their challenges or what's going on. We start to kind of parts detect, and we start to distinguish and decipher the different parts that maybe are coming about or at play, at least in that moment of time. And then we start to bring compassion and care and curiosity and openness to those protective mechanisms. And really, what's absolutely essential is that we need to gain permission from these protective parts. And this is one of the, most beautiful and unique parts of IFS work is that we are honoring those protective mechanisms first and foremost, rather than looking in any way to overcome them, to fix them, to outsmart them, to get rid of them, to shame them, etc. We are really, really honoring them and also working to appreciate them, working to understand what it is that they do, how hard they've been working at that job, when they first started to do that role. What are they afraid of if they didn't do that job, or maybe to the extent that they do? So, for example, um, maybe we'll take an inner critic type of manager or protective part. We start to understand, first, really getting to know how it shows up in the system. And this helps with deciphering it. Like when this part starts to show up, what is it? What sensations does it bring to your body? What kinds of emotions start coming up? What kinds of thoughts? How does your mind respond? Is your mind racing, etc., or going to the negative or whatever? What are you noticing? And we start to understand the energy of this part. And then we start to get a little bit of space between us, the bigger us, and that part. So we unblend. And then from there, we can really start to see it and notice it, and also build a part to self relationship, which is an essential part of IFS, is that we're not just working to understand it from the practitioner therapist point of view, but really for the part to get to know the self of the client and vice versa, and building that relationship. And that also naturally builds more self-leadership as well. And so most of the time we'll use what's called indirect access, which is I'm asking the client from their self to ask the part a question. So it's like, let's ask this part, when it first started to show up in your system with all of these sensations and thoughts and emotions, what was its purpose when it first did that? And when was one of the first times it started to do that? What was going on at that time? Other questions could be, how old does this part think you are? Does it, and oftentimes it'll see the client or us as still the age of when it came about. So it says I'm 8 years old. Oh, interesting. Other questions could be, yeah, if it didn't work so hard at this job, what would it be afraid would happen? And we start to understand what its role is, how hard it's working, how long, etc. And then we start to get to understand what it's protecting us from, what it's afraid of. And that's when we start to access more information about the hurt, the wounding, the exiled part underneath it. So yeah, those are some of the ways we start to play and explore. And then a lot of that is really building appreciation and validation of, well, wow, understanding that's why, or when you came about, no wonder you do what you do at the level that you do. And no wonder that that's being triggered right now, because that's kind of similar to what originally happened, or it could be similar, perceived as similar to what originally happened. Yeah, so hopefully that makes sense.
It does. And the overall goal, let's say, you have, that little 10-year-old that was bullied, and you have the managers and the firefighters that were protecting it. What is the overall goal for all three of those parts
Mm.
at the, in order to say, okay, we've done a good job with IFS?
Mm.
What is the overall goal?
The beautiful thing is that any part of the IFS process is so immensely helpful and healing. So if we're just deciphering and detecting managers and parts, awesome. Like that itself starts to create more of an understanding and orientation of one's system. And we start to de-identify from these patterns, these parts of us. That itself can create immense healing, more inner balance, grounding, etc. So just with that is really incredible. And depending on certain systems, we will, I have clients who we're just working with their protectors for a while, and again, we're not leading the process. There's no agenda. We're really just creating awareness, and we're bringing self energy to these parts. We're honoring them. We're noticing them. So that's one level. Another level would be to appreciate these managers, to really give them the credit they deserve, to recognize them, better understand them, and then build a more direct relationship with them, to where the protective parts recognize that the bigger us or bigger self exists, and that they're not alone, and that they can get our attention, and we will listen, and they don't have to work so hard or be so loud in getting our attention. So that understandably can be immensely supportive as our protective mechanisms start to settle and soften, because they trust that they're not alone. They trust that, over time, there is a bigger self that's here to support them and to lead them and to listen and to honor them and validate them. And then, of course, the next layer is really being able to access, heal, and completely unburden these exiled parts and these wounds. And understandably, that is, one of the most transformative things that we can bring about within clients, within ourselves. And once those exiles are unburdened and healed, they're healed for good. And then from there, the protective mechanisms get to shift. They know, if what they're protecting is no longer needing protecting, then they can completely change roles. They can take a break. They can soften, etc. And really, the biggest aspect of unburdening exiles is that we're bringing a self to a relationship to those younger parts of us, or originally younger parts of us, and recognizing that we can support ourselves and give ourselves everything we need as a base, right? And we really build inner security and stability, knowing that, okay, there's a part of me that didn't get enough necessary attention as a child, for example, from my parents for whatever reason, but the needs of that part are still real and necessary. And so I can then give that part its attention, or I can really recognize what it needs. But also, once it's unburdened, it shifts and it updates, and there is a continual relationship that we continue to practice once we heal our exiles, which is really offering that self energy to ourselves, to those basic needs, and really reparenting in a way ourselves. It's another way of looking at it. But the intensity of that need will shift, if that makes any sense.
It does. That's so beautifully put, because that's what we all want, right? We all want to feel like we're whole and complete and worthy and enough, just the way that we are.
Yeah.
That's what we want. And those parts inside of us, they want that, right?
Yeah.
They want to feel safe, and they want to feel loved, and they want to feel compassion. Yeah, and we all have it. And so I love that this is such an active way to heal. I love talk therapy. I think it's very valuable. I encourage people, if you need someone to talk to, definitely go to
Absolutely.
a good therapist that's going to help you understand yourself and make sense of your, wounds and all of that good stuff. And then, but we can also integrate this and do this all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to be in a therapist's office to do this. We can,
To a degree.
yeah. Well, we need, once we know that we've worked with someone, let me rephrase
Absolutely.
that. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then we can do the work on the fly with ourselves
Yeah,
once we
absolutely.
understand all of this. So I love that. I think it's so important to have tools as well, to help you do the healing. So I love that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's always interesting it's when we think about this question of how much can IFS be used solo versus not, right? And um I always I notice a part of me comes online when I talk about it because I want to be wary to not disempower anyone. I
Yeah.
have a strong belief of this model is so empowering and can be utilized in such a variety of ways. So I want to start with that. But I also want to really recognize the reality of that oftentimes, or depending on where we're at within ourselves, what our healing needs are, what our understanding of IFS is, that it can be really hard to detect the parts of ourselves when we're starting off in this work. And so I also want to mention that because if anyone struggles with that, I just want them to know they're not alone, right? So it's this balance of there's a lot of it we can do with ourselves, and there's a lot that is hard to see in ourselves and it remains in the shadows. And a lot of our parts are kind of meant to, that's their job, is to be very convincing, very blended, very immersive, very captivating. And so it's their whole job is to be difficult to detect. And so that's where one of the reasons that practitioner comes is to really start to reflect and help parts detect and notice those shadows, and also start to distinguish which is what. There's a lot of parts that seem like they're the same thing, but they're really not. So hopefully that's helpful for people to understand about the
Yeah,
model.
I like that clarity. And I think, because, doing this work, and I do this work as well, I had to have a foundation to
Yeah.
understand what
Same.
was happening before I
Mhm.
could actually start to do the work. And definitely, especially with, big T traumas, you
Yeah.
definitely need support because those exiles are in there deep, and
Yeah.
they have more than one manager, probably more than one firefighter, because we want to keep
Absolutely.
them very safe. And we want to make sure that people understand, definitely go to a coach, definitely go to a therapist that is trained in IFS. Make sure that you have an understanding and foundation, and they help
Yeah.
you go deep, because this is not surface level work.
Yeah.
This is not, this is some deep work. But once again, I've got to get my hands on things, right? And that's it feels tangible for me in a
Mm,
way that not all, and there's a lot of therapeutic modalities out there, coaching modalities, and there's something right for everyone.
absolutely.
And this one, I really like to get my hands on it. And so
Mm,
that's what I love about. And speaking of having support,
mm.
Ryen does teach workshops. Ryen has takes clients as well, and all of her information will be in our description box, including upcoming online workshops and in person as well, or only online.
In person also, yeah. If anyone's in the Boulder area, would love to meet them.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
What is one piece of advice, other than find a good practitioner, that you would give someone who is like, okay, this sounds interesting. This is something that's piqued my curiosity. One of the ACs.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would you tell them to do? What would be the first steps for them?
Yeah. I would say I'm having ideas of, anywhere from YouTubing some awesome demonstrations of IFS from various practitioners, especially Richard Schwartz himself, just to see a little bit of the process. Certainly, there's some good foundational books out there on IFS that are all at ifsinstitute.com. They have a whole library of books. Um, I would say a workshop is a good place to start. And that's one of the goals of my workshops, is to help give people a place to explore the model, start to understand it, be able to ask questions, and then dive in on a certain part or topic that we're working with that month. So that's a good example. Yeah, there's lots of great resources out there. Yeah, books, watching demonstrations, and then of course any way they can start to experience it themselves. Parts mapping, if folks can start to kind of journal and notice on their own, kind of start to mapping out, like, oh, I'm noticing this feeling or perspective or side of me, and then I'm noticing this other thing, and it can be really hard to know which one to pay attention to. So there are like simple activities that you can do to start to notice these things, and get to know and befriend those within your system with curiosity and care. Like, oh, okay, I recognize this voice. I think that this is kind of related to this part, or this need that I have, etc.
That's good advice. Yeah, I love it. When you say the words internal family systems, everyone hears family, right? That kind of, they think it's working with your external family, right? And there's systematic work, right, that you need to do with family, and that's all very important. This is your internal family.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you think of it that way, it's like, oh, we all have an internal family inside of us. Why not have a functional, happy, healed
Yeah,
internal family?
harmonious.
Yeah,
Yeah, and the
harmonious.
beautiful part of it is that once you start to notice these parts, then you start to notice the relationship between these parts. Absolutely. And yeah, like you're saying, they interact like they would, like family members do. And they all serve a purpose and role, and they all have their histories and their relationships that are specific to each other, etc. So yeah, it's forever fascinating.
It is forever fascinating. I agree with you on that. Ryen, it was such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for sharing your insights and expertise. This knowledge is so valuable, and I can't wait to share it. And once again, all of Ryen's information will be in the description box. And you can find coaching, workshops, in person, online. You also have a YouTube channel, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I would say
Yeah.
most things are on my Instagram at this point, but there are a few things on my YouTube as well.
Great. And how can they find you on Instagram?
It'll just be under my first and last name. Yeah. So Ryen Blaschke, and I'm sure you'll see the spelling in the notes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. And all those links will be in the description. So Ryen, when Christine is able to join us, we'd love to have you back and dig a little deeper into IFS or whatever you want to talk about.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me, and especially for bringing IFS to more people, the awareness of it, some level of understanding and access to more people. So thank you so much for providing this space.
Thank you. All right, everyone. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.